Nigerian scammers steal over $100 million every month from victims worldwide. But here's what shocked me most. Many of them perform ancient money rituals, believing these ceremonies will multiply their success. So I decided to try it myself. It's a statistic that should make us all pause. Every 30 days, more money than most of us will see in a lifetime disappears into the digital ether, stolen by sophisticated networks of fraudsters. But what I discovered in my research wasn't just about technology or clever social engineering. It was about something far more complex: the intersection of desperation, tradition, and the eternal human desire for quick wealth. The term Yahoo Boys might sound almost quaint to outsiders, but it represents a multi-billion-dollar industry that has transformed parts of Nigeria and affected millions of victims worldwide. These aren't just computer-savvy criminals. They're young men, often educated, who've turned internet fraud into an art form. But what fascinated me most wasn't their technical skills. It was their belief in juju, traditional spiritual practices. They're convinced will amplify their success. I first heard about these money rituals through encrypted forums and whispered conversations in Lagos internet cafes. The practitioners speak of ancient ceremonies involving specific herbs, incantations, and sometimes more disturbing elements, all designed to ensure their scams succeed. It's a world where cutting-edge technology meets age-old superstition, where young men seeking fortune blend cryptocurrency fraud with traditional African spirituality. The more I learned, the more I realized this wasn't just about crime. It was about a generation caught between poverty and possibility, turning to both modern tools and ancient beliefs in their quest for wealth. And so, with considerable trepidation and a commitment to understanding rather than judging, I decided to investigate these rituals firsthand. Before I could even begin this investigation, I had to confront some uncomfortable truths. Every dollar stolen through these scams comes from real people: elderly individuals losing their life savings, lonely hearts manipulated through fake romance, small businesses destroyed by fraudulent transactions. The human cost is immeasurable, and I couldn't ignore that reality. But I also couldn't ignore the context. Nigeria, despite its oil wealth, remains a country where youth unemployment exceeds 40%, where university graduates drive taxis or sell phone credit on street corners, where the gap between the wealthy elite and everyone else seems insurmountable. In this environment, the success stories of Yahoo Boys, their designer clothes, expensive cars, and lavish lifestyles, become powerful magnets for desperate young people. The ethical dilemma was clear. How do you investigate something without appearing to endorse it? These questions haunted me as I began reaching out to practitioners, researchers, and former victims. I knew I was walking a tightrope between journalism and complicity. What struck me most during these early conversations was the genuine belief many of these young men had in their rituals. It was a worldview that combined pragmatic criminality with sincere spiritual conviction, and it challenged my assumptions about both crime and faith. My investigation started in the most unlikely place: a university library in Ibadan, where I spent weeks reading about traditional Yoruba spiritual practices, the history of juju, and the anthropological studies of West African belief systems. I needed to understand the legitimate spiritual traditions before I could comprehend how they were being adapted for criminal purposes. The academic research revealed a rich tapestry of beliefs about spiritual influence over material success. Traditional practitioners, known as Babalawo, have for centuries performed ceremonies designed to bring good fortune in business, love, and life. What the Yahoo Boys had done was adapt these ancient practices for their modern criminal enterprises. My next step was more challenging, making contact with active practitioners. Through a network of intermediaries, journalists, and reformed ex-scammers, I eventually connected with several young men willing to discuss their practices. They spoke on condition of anonymity, and their stories revealed a subculture I never could have imagined. One contact, who I'll call Emeka, described his weekly ritual routine with the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing their gym schedule. Every Tuesday, he would visit a particular shrine outside Lagos, bringing specific offerings and requesting success for his romance scams targeting American women. He genuinely believed this spiritual preparation was as important as his technical skills in crafting convincing fake profiles. Another practitioner, Kemi, had developed what she called a hybrid approach, combining traditional juju with newer spiritual movements. She would perform ancient money rituals while also attending prosperity gospel churches, seeing no contradiction between asking ancestral spirits and the Christian God for success in her fraudulent activities. The moment of truth came when I decided to participate in one of these ceremonies myself. I want to be absolutely clear. I had no intention of using any supposed spiritual benefits for actual criminal activity. My goal was purely investigative, to understand the psychological and cultural forces at work. Through Emeka's connections, I was introduced to a traditional practitioner who agreed to perform a modified money ritual. The ceremony took place in a small shrine on the outskirts of Lagos, surrounded by carved wooden figures and the lingering scent of incense and palm wine. The ritual itself was both more mundane and more intense than I had expected. It began with purification, washing with specially prepared herbs while the practitioner chanted in Yoruba. Then came the offerings, kola nuts, honey, and a small amount of money placed before carved figures representing various spirits. The practitioner explained that I was asking the ancestors to open the way for financial success. What struck me most wasn't the ceremony itself, but the absolute conviction of everyone involved. The practitioner spoke with the authority of someone performing a medical procedure. Emeka, who had accompanied me, nodded along with the familiarity of routine. For them, this wasn't superstition, it was technology, just as real and practical as the computers they used for their scams. The psychological impact was unexpected. Despite my skepticism, I found myself caught up in the ritual's intensity. The chanting, the smoky atmosphere, the weight of tradition. It created a powerful sense of transformation, even for a non-believer. I began to understand how young men, already operating outside society's rules, could find these ceremonies both spiritually meaningful and practically empowering. But the most revealing moment came afterward, during the informal conversation that followed. The practitioner, an elderly man with decades of experience, spoke candidly about his conflicted feelings regarding his Yahoo Boy clients. He believed in the power of his rituals, but he also understood the harm caused by their criminal activities. It was a contradiction he lived with daily, providing spiritual services to young men whose success came at others' expense. 3 weeks after the ceremony, something unexpected happened. I received an email from a documentary producer in London, offering me a significant sum for the rights to a story I had written months earlier. The timing was purely coincidental, but the psychological impact was profound. For a brief moment, I found myself wondering if the ritual had actually worked. This was my moment of realization about the true power of these ceremonies. It wasn't about supernatural intervention. It was about confidence, belief, and the psychological transformation that comes from feeling spiritually empowered. The young men who performed these rituals weren't just seeking magical assistance. They were creating a mental framework that made them feel destined for success. I watched this dynamic play out with Emeka over the following weeks. After performing his Tuesday ritual, he would approach his scamming activities with renewed confidence and creativity. His success rate improved, not because of spiritual intervention, but because he believed he was spiritually protected and empowered. The ritual had become a form of psychological preparation, like an athlete's pregame routine. But this realization also highlighted the tragic irony of the entire system. These young men were using genuine spiritual traditions and authentic belief systems to justify and enhance criminal activities that ultimately harmed both their victims and their own communities. They had taken something sacred and twisted it into a tool for exploitation. The most chilling moment came when I witnessed the aftermath of a successful scam. Emeka had convinced an elderly American woman to send him several $1,000s, supposedly to help with a family emergency. As he celebrated his success, attributing it to both his technical skills and his spiritual preparation, I couldn't help but think about the victim. Someone's grandmother, perhaps, who had trusted a stranger and lost money she couldn't afford to lose. My investigation into Yahoo Boy money rituals revealed truths that were both simpler and more complex than I had anticipated. The rituals themselves had no supernatural power, but their psychological impact was undeniable. They provided young men with a sense of spiritual backing for activities they knew were morally questionable, creating a framework that allowed them to reconcile their criminal behavior with their cultural and spiritual identities. What I learned about the nature of belief was equally revealing. These weren't cynical manipulations of tradition. They were genuine adaptations of authentic spiritual practices to modern circumstances. The practitioners truly believed in what they were doing, which made their activities both more understandable and more troubling. The broader implications extend far beyond Nigeria or internet fraud. In a world where traditional economic opportunities seem increasingly scarce, where young people feel disconnected from conventional paths to success, the appeal of alternative routes, whether criminal, spiritual, or both, becomes more powerful. The Yahoo Boy phenomenon represents a collision between ancient beliefs and modern desperation, between traditional culture and global capitalism. Perhaps most importantly, I realized that understanding these activities doesn't mean excusing them. The victims of these scams, the elderly Americans, the lonely Europeans, the small business owners around the world, remain victims regardless of the spiritual beliefs or economic circumstances of their attackers. Empathy for the perpetrators cannot come at the expense of justice for those they harm. My experience also highlighted the complex relationship between poverty, opportunity, and moral choice. While economic desperation doesn't justify criminal behavior, it does help explain why intelligent, educated young people might turn to fraud and seek spiritual justification for their actions. Addressing the Yahoo Boy phenomenon requires not just law enforcement, but also economic development, educational opportunities, and cultural change. As I conclude this investigation, I'm left with more questions than answers. The world of Yahoo Boy money rituals represents a fascinating and troubling intersection of technology, tradition, crime, and belief. It challenges our assumptions about both criminal behavior and spiritual practice, revealing the complex ways people adapt ancient wisdom to modern circumstances. What's clear is that this phenomenon won't be solved by simple solutions. It requires understanding the cultural, economic, and psychological forces that drive young people toward these activities. It demands recognition that behind every statistic about internet fraud are real people, both perpetrators and victims, whose lives are shaped by forces larger than individual choice. I want to hear your thoughts on this investigation. Have you encountered similar intersections of technology and tradition in your own experience? What do you think drives people to seek spiritual justification for questionable activities? Share your perspectives in the comments below. This conversation is too important for any one voice to dominate. If this exploration of crime, culture, and belief has intrigued you, I encourage you to watch my previous investigation into prosperity gospel churches and their relationship with financial exploitation. The connections between spiritual belief and economic behavior run deeper than most of us realize, and understanding them is crucial for navigating our increasingly complex world.